Good evening, everybody. This is Oceanus, back from being drilled, prodded, blood-sucked, everything medical under the sun. Today, I'm... I don't really have a script for this video because I just saw this, but I think it was an interesting read, and mainly because I heavily disagree with Pedro Gonzalez's argument. And that is the new right's toxic addiction to racial conflict. Let's see what Pedro Gonzalez has to say, and if anybody, if you know, if you've been in circles for a while, right-wing circles, Pedro Gonzalez was a right-winger. I think he still kind of is, but he's not. He's not a. I don't know what he is really. He had like a really interesting political journey. I'm not gonna get into that now, but um, we'll just see what he has to say here. It seems like ancient history now, but it was only a year and a half ago that Elon Musk found himself on the wrong side of the new right after he signaled support for the H-1B visa program. No one contributed more money to Donald Trump's re-election, and no one seemed to fall from grace faster. Musk's thought crime was to acknowledge that the talents of foreign workers have made America strong and built his companies. MAGA turned on Musk with shocking speed and ferocity, and he was defiant in turn. Take a big step back and bleep yourself in the face, he told critics. I remember this. I remember this. This was in December, right after Donald Trump got elected, and um, Elon was talking about H-1Bs, and a lot of people, myself included, were like, "No, Elon, that's bad. We don't want H-1Bs coming to our country. We want you to pull from domestic American talent. Like, don't claim to be America first if you're going to use foreign labor." And I'm not totally against Musk, but this was really a low point in my opinion of him, and it's obvious to me that Pedro was on Musk's side of the argument here, to which I'd like to ask why that is. But let's keep going. Then a few months later, Musk began feuding with Trump himself over the outlays in the GOP's signature spending and taxation bill, a fight that soon metastasized. Given the magnitude of the egos involved, Musk went so far as to accuse Trump of intentionally sabotaging the handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Former Trump advisor Stephen Bannon called on Trump to nationalize Musk's companies and deport him. Online, Trump's most fervent psychopaths fantasized about Musk being executed for his disloyalty. Okay, if Musk is going around advocating for H-1B labor, which he was doing, why would I suddenly be for that? It's not freaking psychophantic, and I don't think he should be executed. Let me tell you that. I don't think he should be executed for saying what he said. But it's not psychophantic behavior to have a set of principles and abide by them. I don't believe in foreign labor. Why? Why am I being called a psychopath for my position aligning with Donald Trump just because he's president? That's not psychophantic behavior. That is having principles. Which is funny because a lot of people on this part of the right, they love to talk about principles, principles, principles. But the moment you don't share their principles and you stick to your own principles, they're like, "Oh, you're a cultist." Funny how that goes. I just want to I just want to go over here and no, I don't want to do that one. I don't remember exactly what the feud was about. Let me see what it was. Doge disappointed. Okay. Okay, there's something to do with Tesla. I need to that I'm not paying to read one article. Many observers believed Musk's MAGA affair had come to an end, but as recovering MAGA adherent myself, I noticed something. You say that as if it's a freaking a drug addiction. Like, how pretentious can you be? I noticed that something that made me suspect otherwise. Around the time the world's richest man saw his influence of the right slipping, he began to post more about race. Oh, yes, this is very true. The right, in response, slowly warmed him again. In an analysis by the Washington Post found that, from October 2025 to mid-April, Musk indeed significantly increased his rate of online posts about race and his concerns about perceived threats to whiteness, or what he views as a call for genocide against white people. He posts about race almost every day during this period, as nearly triple the rate for the previous 2 years. Okay, and The online right took notice. The rhetoric from Elon Musk is huge, and if he keeps it up, it will save lives, wrote one influential race-baiting ex-user. Who's this? I wonder who this is. India taking L's. Okay. Okay. I never heard of him. This shift reached a crescendo this summer when Musk publicly supported Citizen Vigilante, a film about a man who kills immigrants, criminals and non-criminals alike. One person posted a menacing image of the film's title of Vigilante, captioned first the traitors and the invaders. Musk replied, yes, endorsing the notion of executing perceived race traitors. The phrasing and the sentiment behind it were lifted right out of the Turner Diaries, an infamous white supremacist novel about a race war in which non-whites and their white allies are slaughtered by a group of radicals who usurp the federal government. This novel would help shape the worldview of the right-wing terrorist Timothy McVeigh, who killed 167 people and injured 684 in his 1995 bombing attack on Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Okay, yes, I know that book. It was written by William Luther Pierce, and I don't believe that Elon actually agrees with that. Because here's the thing. When Elon does a lot of talking about white issues, and most of this has to do with his upbringing and his being from South Africa, which is a country where white people are very much persecuted based on their skin color, and they are facing violence from the black population. Now, that being said, while Elon has done a lot of service for that front, most of his other issues are basically just lip service. Like, yes, he'll say this stuff about white people, but then he'll go on and he'll ban um, white people who organize and act and white activists online. It's like Patriot Front, for example. You, I did a piece, I did a video a while back about Patriot Front and how X was banning people for speaking about them, people who spoke about white issues. And so while Elon does do this, he does it to an extent. Like he's very much a civic nationalist. He's not a white nationalist. And Pedro Gonzalez, as an avid user of Twitter and an avid follower, not follower, but avid watcher of Elon Musk and commentator of Donald Trump, should know the difference between ethnic nationalism, white nationalism, and civic nationalism. Donald Trump and Elon Musk's are civic nationalists. And I'll get to why later, but for now, we're going to keep reading. Musk was able to survive the fallout from his initial break with the MAGA right because he, like Trump, understands something important about the present moment. There's no more powerful force in the right-wing psyche than racial conflict. It is the reason that Musk is once more viewed as a movement hero on the right, and why conservative movement remains in Trump's thrall. Every other issue in consideration is a far distant second to the specter of the racial conflict that, in the right-wing imagination, is forever looming on the horizon. Here's the issue, though. And again, Donald Trump is also a civic nationalist. He's not a white nationalist. Donald Trump is not a white nationalist. Now, does Donald Trump have policies that benefit the white demographic majority in the United States? Yes, he does. His border policies, his immigration policies, they clearly benefit white Americans. But that does not make him a white nationalist. I don't understand why Pedro is confusing um, what are clearly policies that are aligned with white interests and being a white nationalist in of itself. Because if you've a lot of people dislike Trump because he's not a white nationalist. Like there's a lot of people who think that Trump hasn't done enough on the immigration front on the other issues. They think that he's bringing in too many legal immigrants. I think that he's a little bit too friendly to H-1B visas. Not as friendly as Elon Musk is, but still friendly nonetheless. And the other thing that I don't understand, or at least I do understand it, but I don't understand why Pedro is pretending that this is the case. Like every other issue and consideration is a far distant second to the specter of racial conflict that the right wing imagination is forever looming on the horizon. But you understand, Pedro, that The entire reason that we had these discussions about race was because the left and the coalitions like Black Lives Matter, the American Indian Movement, the freaking who else? Every other minority group under the sun that has an advocacy group, they've always been making their arguments about white people bad and how white people need to atone for the sins of the past, and how that America is founded on stolen land, and that we need to bring in more refugees, migrants, and whatnot to erase the whiteness of America and decolonize the country. And this has been going on for years, years before Donald Trump ever came on the scene. And yet you're blaming the right wing for finally countering this messaging? No, 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 no. Had that messaging not been going on, had this anti-white coalition not been going on, building up in the left and culminating in these events such as the 2014 Michael Brown riots in Missouri and then the 2020 George Floyd riots all over the country, which were very much built upon by anti-white sentiment, then the right wing would not be seeing this increase in white racial consciousness. It just wouldn't be. You're blaming the wrong people, Pedro, because the right wing for years, for decades, since the civil rights movement, had been very colorblind, had been race blind. If you were, it didn't matter what color you were, if you shared the values of being a right winger, then you were welcomed in. Um, and that really, it's been changing in the past decade because of this anti-white sentiment that is building on the left, and how you're seeing a lot of these black Hispanics, Asians, and everybody else going to these extreme anti-white ideologies and blaming white people for all their problems. And so then you have white people on the right who are like, okay, well, if you're going to be doing this, and we're going to be doing this as well, just on the opposite direction. Is it productive? We don't know. But that's the reality of what's going on here. And again, you're failing to recognize that. Or you're just ignoring it completely. I don't know why. This tendency has always existed in the GOP, though under the pressures of maintaining respectability in the political mainstream, gatekeepers in the conservative movement sought to marginalize its uglier manifestations. The racial panics that gained more recent favor in the conservative movement were also somewhat more targeted than the race hatreds that convulsed the right in the 20th century, zeroing in narrow, disfavored groups such as Muslims, because radical Islam was a problem after 9/11. And it could have been easily avoided had we not taken in a bunch of people from Muslim countries that ended up raising their kids to dislike us, and then culminating in fricking Hassan Piker, for example, whose entire podcast is always about white people bad, America's bad, America deserved 9/11. That's what he keeps saying. So why do you think that that's the case? Mind you, the GOP back then really didn't do a good job of countering it, but it didn't come out of nowhere. With Trump's takeover, however, the GOP has once more become a clearinghouse of a viral racial animus, building a far more extensive and expanding list of enemies. The centrality of racial conflict also why the efforts of Republicans such as Mike Pence, who recently launched a think tank to claim the party from Trump's influence, are doomed to fail. People like Pence want to go back to serving warm beer after Trump has had everyone slamming the hard stuff for the last decade. In 1968, Republican strategist Kevin Phillips said that the whole secret of politics is knowing who hates who, and no one has embraced that cynical philosophy or utilized it more effectively than Trump. But here's the thing, though, the other side does this too. Like, what are you saying? Well, this is a very one-sided um, analysis, Pedro. If you didn't have a bunch of people on the left who are like white people bad, then you wouldn't be seeing white people on the right be like, you know what? I'm not ashamed. Screw your white guilt. This whole thing stems from an unwillingness to forgive past transgressions, and then not only that, but then blaming white people who were never there, who were born way after these transgressions ensued, blaming them while also never experiencing these past transgressions, and then it just takes off from there. Why, when I was, what did I, a freaking 26-year-old man at this point, have to do with freaking segregation, Jim Crow, lynching, any of that stuff? What did I have to do with that? But why am I blamed anyway? That's the thing. Again, this is a very one-sided analysis, which is weird because Pedro was on the right. I would have expected him to be able to analyze this more effectively. Phillips is an important figure in the GOP history because it was his 1968 memo for Richard Nixon's presidential campaign that outlined the Southern strategy to exploit racial resentment among certain white voters. Phillips built out his strategy in response to segregationist George Wallace's third-party bid. Wallace, then the Democratic governor of Alabama, ran for president on an openly anti-civil rights platform. By dog whistling about crime, decentralization of federal social programming, and law and order, Phillips wrote Nixon could implicitly appealed to the racial anxieties of Wallace supporters without using the governor's incendiary language, which would jeopardize the support of white moderates. The Southern strategy worked so well that every Republican president since Nixon has embraced it to some extent, and also the South has become rather colorblind to some extent since then. So it wasn't really racial animus that had them had Southerners voting Republican. Because what you don't understand is that I'm not saying what Pedro doesn't understand about the South here is that Republican control of the South only really solidified in the past decade, and even then, it's not completely solid red. Like you have places like Kentucky that have Democratic governors, like Andy Beshear, for example, but you also had governors in the South who were solidly Democratic until the late 2010s at the least. When I moved to Missouri in 2010, Missouri was under a Democratic governor, and he didn't leave office until 2017. And we see Missouri today as a solid red state. So, again, this isn't a well thought out analysis here. How do you explain that? Trump's central innovation in his second term has been to elevate the Southern strategy from a campaign tactic to a governing agenda, a fact the right simultaneously celebrates on its own terms and denies when others take notice. Take, for example, the case of Scott Greer, who was fired from the Daily Caller, the right-wing website founded by Tucker Carlson for his ties to white nationalist groups. In an interview with the Ezra Klein Show, Christopher Rufo, the senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, best known for his crusade against critical race theory, argued that Greer should still be granted a platform since Greer himself has since advocated against the white nationalist label. But this proves to largely be a distinction without a difference. Greer hasn't so much reconsidered his core views on race, rather the MAGA GOP has gravitated more closely to them, which means that he can rehabilitate his standing in the movement with minimal and mostly cosmetic changes to his rhetoric. He's comfortable calling himself a conservative because the label now includes views that were once relegated to fringe white nationalist figures. Even the self-described white advocate Jared Taylor has criticized Greer and those like him for wanting to have it both ways, discarding fraught segregation-friendly labels for the sake of optics while claiming that the Trumpified GOP is the best vehicle for advancing the views associated with those labels. On one level, this feud among white nationalists is eloquent testimony to how far right the GOP has veered on race, which might have earlier been fodder for an unhinged right-wing Reddit flame war is now a platform for commentators on the right like Rufo to ally themselves with white nationalists who, until very recently, disparaged his work as an accommodationist obstacle to full-blown right-wing identitarianism. And by most reasonable measures, both Greer and Taylor are right. Racists can have it both ways on the right, and the savvy career move for ambitious right nationalists like Greer is to throw it in with the GOP. After all, the people running the White House social media pages have incorporated themes and even music drawn from consciously white supremacist scenes. What was once relegated to the fringe is now mainstream on the right. And again, I follow Greer. I don't think he's a white nationalist. Again, the White House is not white nationalist either. Donald Trump is a civic nationalist. He's not a white nationalist. Yes, sometimes the interests of civic and white nationalists might coincide, but at the end of the day, um, Donald Trump believes in Americanism as a multi-ethnic, multiracial project and not a solely white project. I know this firsthand. I was a former enthusiastic recruit to the MAGA right. I watched this transformation happen in real time from the inside. I traveled from the edge of the right to become a Lincoln Fellow of the Claremont Institute, which, like virtually every other conservative institution today, has given Trump carte blanche under the belief that he's the only thing standing between the West and race communism, or more commonly known Third worldism. The nomenclature is always fungible. What's constant is the invocation of a mortal racialized threat to civilization as they know it. Well, here's the thing, Pedro. If they didn't want that to happen, they shouldn't have made themselves the mortal racialized threat to civilization as we know it. Because what I'm seeing right now is a group of people who want to tear down the West, who want to flood European and white nations with a bunch of third worlders from the Middle East, Africa, India, you know it, and be like, we need to decolonize these countries. White people get out, and especially in America because we don't have. I mean, we do have, but we don't have it in modern day. An ethnic basis for existence. They see America as a civic project which they hate, and they can deconstruct to make it into um, a what's the word, multiracial decolonized land, which becomes, I don't know, not America. Europe is having the same problem. The only difference between Europe and the United States is there are ethnic bases for European nations to exist. And so it's a bit harder to convince people like, hey, you see, Mr. British guy, you're not actually British. You're not indigenous to this land. You know who is indigenous to this land? It's this guy from fricking India or this guy from North Africa. And then you have the British person who's like, wait, that's not true. My family's been here for thousands of years. But it's the same playbook. It's just harder to implement because you have these people who realize, wait a minute, that's not correct. But yes, this is happening, Pedro. I don't understand why you're not wanting to see it. I can't lie to my audience and say that it's not happening because I see it happening on a daily basis. If I'm if you're going to call me a white nationalist for that, then like, and I'm sorry, but like I can't really refute that point because I'm merely reporting the truth here. If it wasn't true, why is it that we're seeing a whole bunch of people um, coming into freaking the Spanish enclave in Morocco? Cuenca, I think it's called. Yes. There was a giant rush of people coming over there because they knew that the freaking prime minister of Spain would be like, we gotta let these people in. We gotta take them to the Spanish mainland. We have to help them. And it's basically that you ever read the book? I haven't read it myself, but I know the plot of it. The Camp of the Saints, where Europe was overtaken by a bunch of people from everywhere else. Like what happened in Cuenca is basically what that book was warning about. It was a banned book. It was a very controversial book, but I think the guy who wrote it back in the 70s actually was spot on, albeit a few decades too early. In a nutshell, the right understands itself as being in a struggle against a racial and demographic clock. It's true. Without some drastic intervention, a long line of demagogues on the right routinely lament the United States will be swamped by a coalition of non-whites, immigrants, and white enablers who will bring about a dark age of acute government dysfunction and naked corruption. The prime directive of this new regime will be the full persecution of whites who will become victims of an ever-intensifying system of racial favoritism that places them at the bottom. That's what's going on, though! What? That's literally what's going on on a very small scale. Not a very small scale, a wide scale, but not up to the scale of, oh, we are in control of the government now and we're going to do this from the top down. You can't tell me the past decade this hasn't been happening with diversity, equity, inclusion. What else? Mass immigration, NGOs bringing people to the United States, the defund the police movement, the anti prison abolition movement, the prison abolition movement. All of this is done because of to rebel against a system put in place by white people. It's like, I'm sorry, Pate. I'm not sorry, but it's like this is what's going on. Like I can't. This reads like a parody here. This reads like a parody because it's exactly what is happening in this country and what has been happening in this country and in Europe for the past decade, maybe even more. But the past decade made it more noticeable. Okay. As the Musk episode showed, no one on the right can be seen as a backslider from the position and still have a viable political career. It is bulked in the badge of right-wing identity, fulfilling much the same role that tax-cutting anti-government ideology did in the 1980s and 90s. Its status as an unshakable article of faith in the MAGA movement also means that it doesn't really matter whether the leaders who've been bought into it are really subscribed to it. Its instrumental value is simply too great as long as these apocalyptic delusions have the movement's base in their grip. Trump understands this instinctively, and Musk figured it out by paying attention to him. So did J.D. Vance. An empty suit is a reliable weather vane, as we've seen in Vance's cunning reinvention from another never Trump conservative who compared Trump to Hitler and an ardent purveyor of MAGA racial panics. Now, again, I don't know where this idea that Donald Trump or Elon Musk or J.D. Vance, for that matter, are all secret white nationalists is coming from, but I do find it really interesting why everyone always talks about this Vance quote when a lot of people back then were rather uneducated when it came to politics and really just saw things at surface value. Like I myself what didn't hold the exact opinions that I hold today because I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have been. So this weird thing where we can't like grow and like like Pedro, you were pretty much white nationalist adjacent as well back then. Or at least after your Bernie bro phase. You were very hardline immigration restrictionist, and I remember this very well because I followed you on X for the longest time on Twitter. So what are you doing here, saying like, oh, JD Vance's politics were different when a decade ago, and now they're different now? When what do you were doing the same thing except in reverse. You went from immigration restrictionist to maybe we do need H-1Bs after all. That's really interesting. And then you talk about JD Vance. Okay. The price of this sort of cynical demagoguery is steep. The civilization that is dogmatically held to be imperiled by brown and foreign hordes has degenerated under Trump's watch into a kleptocratic kakistocracy without an analog in American history. It's impossible in this compass to detail all the way Trump has made American life materially worse and more dystopian while profiting from the collective misery of millions of everyday people. A partial inventory would include monetizing the White House for Trump to make more money than he did as businessman, Musk's own colossally destructive and deadly reign at Doge, and unleashing new disease threats through sheer incompetence, and a relentless onslaught against the environment and wildlife, the unprecedented weaponization of the Department of Justice, the killings of American citizens by federal agents with impunity, and the destruction of a digital police state that groups like Claremont, prior to their own MAGA makeovers, would decry as a civil liberties travesty. Okay, first off, I'm not going to deny Trump is a very wacky guy, but a lot of this is just really silly. Like new disease threats. No, the news disease threats came from all the third worlders with the unhygienic third worlders that Biden allowed over the border. Like you're not going to tell me that the freaking diarrhea lettuce epidemic we have now is because of freaking RFK Jr. Putting higher food safety standards in effect, and not the guys from India picking the crops that they used to, you know, as toilet paper. Like, no, that's ridiculous. And again, I've covered a lot of this. I've covered before, so I'm not going to get into it. If you want to look at my channel and look at the videos where I've talked about these things, you can. Yet all this criminal dysfunction is the only part of the cost of doing business so far as the white nationalist right is concerned. Within its charmed Caucasian chalk circle, there's simply no price that's too high for saving America from third worldism, even if the rescue operation turns America into the very sort of squalid authoritarian regime the right associates with the incoherent term. That is also why there's no reason to believe an internal course correction is in the cards. If there is hope, it is in an expanded democratic coalition that is more amenable to dissent, disagreement, and defectors. No, thank you. After the cavalcade of race panics, the second most powerful tool in the right's arsenal is the fear of no return, the notion that the mandate of civilizational restoration means that there's no alternative but to be locked into the right, that changing one's mind is irrelevant or futile because one's allegiance is preordained in one's genetic makeup. Of course, this is another lie, one that appeals to the worst aspects of our nature. The truth is that America's story, at its best, is one of reconciliation. Even George Wallace turned a hard corner later in life and found redemption. It is high time that conservatives in America took note of how Wallace turned his life around, rather than mimicking his opportunistic descent into bigotry and hatred. All right, well, you know what? We can do that. We can do that, Pedro, when the freaking anti-white coalition that is increasingly taking over the left of American politics does the same thing. But they're not doing that, and you're not calling them out for some reason. Why is that? Why is that, Mr. Principled Conservative? Like I've said it a million times in here, your analysis is very one-sided. You're it's like you're it's like you're painting a picture, but you're leaving one half of the canvas blank. Like, oh, here's the scary right wingers, scary white nationalists. Oh my goodness, why are they doing what they're doing? Why do they hold the opinions that they have? And then this on the other side of the canvas, which you conveniently leave blank, is the fact that there has been a growing anti-white coalition of people that is increasingly taking over the left and and some aspects of the right too, and is pushing their policies onto the country, wanting to decolonize America, wanting to put wanting to just delegitimize it. Like math is racist now. Like what are you talking about? What are you talking about? It's the right that's doing this. If anything, what's happening on the right is a reaction to everything that's going on the left. Are we? Is the right just supposed to? And by the way, these are very silly labels because I have right wing opinions. I also have left wing opinions. I have opinions that are rather centrist. But if you can't say that okay, the right's doing all this stupid stuff. They need to stop it. And then you just don't even look at what everything else is happening. Are you saying that it's the right that started this racial conflict in this country? I mean, okay, if you want to go back years and years and years ago, okay, maybe it was. But in modern times, are you saying that everything that's going on right now with the left, quote unquote left, and quote unquote right is because of something that the quote unquote right did at the turn of the century? And that the quote unquote left's reaction to whatever this thing the quote unquote right did is justified? Because why are you telling us to go sit in the timeout box? And yet, you're telling the people who you're not telling people who actually poked the bear that they could just do whatever they want to, because that's what's going on here. And you know this, Pedro. You've been in right wing white nationalist adjacent circles for years and years and years. You've seen the arguments. You made some of these arguments yourself, and now you're just saying, "Oh wait, no, I was completely incorrect." Even though a couple years back you had been like, "Yeah, this is exactly what's going on, and we need to stop it." Like this is the epitome of grift. But anyways, guys, I've been going on for 34 minutes. I did not mean to make this video as long as it has been. This is gonna be a paid upload into the YouTube. But I just had to give my commentary on this. I mean, Pedro, if you want to respond to this, go ahead. I'm not good with words. I get that. I'm not good with words. I do better typing things out. But anyway, just I can't see this as a good analysis. I'm sorry. It's one sided, and it only paints half a picture. Have a good night, everybody.